This episode is brought to you by Wisconsin Cheese. Wisconsin, the state of cheese, makes half of the nation's specialty cheese and wins more awards than any other state or country. Our heritage and traditions, master cheesemaker program, and the American propensity for innovation all put Wisconsin on the cutting wedge of cheesemaking. With over 600 varieties of cheese to choose from and 5,500 national and international awards and counting, get ready to turn your refrigerator into a trophy case. Enjoying a Wisconsin cheese is basically like winning a gold medal in culinary achievement. Set your mind at cheese. When you bite into a wedge of Wisconsin Wonderful, you know it is made with the ultimate skill and passion possible. Find your next favorite cheese at wisconsincheese.com.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Hey, welcome to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. I'm Jimmy Carboni. I'm the host. It's our 16th year, and we're talking with Mr. Tom Acitelli, a great beer writer. I knew him as the author of Audacity of Hops, and now he's got a new book out called The Golden Age of Beer, and we're here at Notch Brewing in Brighton, which is part of Boston, right across from Cambridge, and we're drinking a couple beers from our friend Chris Loring, and we're gonna take it away. So thanks so much, Tom, for joining me.
Jimmy, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
So tell us a little bit about this book, because I like beer books, I like beer styles, so this kind of fits everything I like to talk about.
Thank you. Me too. The Golden Age of Beer. I've spent about 3 years. I had spent about 3 years writing it at a very difficult time in the industry, with a lot of churn in the number of breweries, and of course the challenges coming out of the pandemic. There was also, larger socioeconomic situation in the country. And also the most important thing, and the thing that I really struggled with in writing it, was, a changing consumer base. You have kind of the older, more experienced craft beer aficionado types like ourselves who know a lot about different styles and know a lot about brewing and beer and have their favorite brands and have their favorite people in the industry and their favorite brew pubs, etc. Like this wonderful one, by the way, this Notch Brewing is just fantastic.
So
I just discovered it
near here, and
I live fewer than 2 miles away. No, never been over. So this is going to be a
shout
stop.
out to Chris Loring and his team here at Notch. It was about 2 years ago. I came here and visited him in Boston, and that we did a great show about the Pitch Line Pills that had come out. It might have been 3 years ago now, and it was one of my best beer experiences ever. And that's why I'm excited about your book.
I bet.
Let's go back to the beginning. So when I was first learning about beer a while ago, I did have that book, the Michael Jackson book, one of those World Atlas of Beer type things. And what I loved about it was not just reading about these great styles from whether Belgium or Germany or England, but the photos as well. And there's one of this place in Prague called U Flaku, which was a basement bar in Prague. And it inspired me when I opened my old pub, Jimmy's Number 43. That, hey, it kind of looks like that.
Right.
I don't need to do anything.
Sure.
I'm in the basement and all this other stuff. But I don't know. So your book here, Golden Age of Beer, it's a homage to and inspired by Michael Jackson.
Yes, definitely. The World Guide to Beer, which came out in 1977 in the UK, and then I think about a year later in the US, was profoundly influential. And that's one of the things I wanted to bring out in the World Guide, in the Golden Age of Beer that I did. And getting back to my point, the changing marketplace, craft beer consumers under 40, under 45, say, aren't as familiar with the history and aren't as familiar with the history of the styles, and names like Michael Jackson might not be as familiar with them. So I wanted to make I wanted to weave that into the book, into the golden age of beer, and sort of bring back this history and bring it the history of the style and how we got to it, bring it back to life and make it more relevant. And so that was a big part of the book of just trying to sort of resurrect the information and make it punchy and make it fun, because I didn't want this to be pedantic or sort of a lecture. I wanted this to be fun. I want, it's beer.
Well, when I start with the book, the first entry is triple, Belgian
Okay.
triples.
Yes.
And I'll tell you why I love that, because for me that was my gateway beer.
Is-
So I mean, my daughter's 22, and so I think more about, these young drinkers experiencing things and going off the beaten path of just
Right.
vodka, soda, or whatever they're
Right.
drinking these days. I love triple. For me, that was a drink. It
Oh,
stood up
definitely.
to a cocktail. It gave me the good inebriation, and it's delicious. And if it's made right with malt and not too much candied sugar,
Yeah.
Again, the test I have these days is, do I have a headache the next day?
Right.
A good triple, I don't.
That's so true. One of the best trips I ever took in my beer writing career was to visit what was then the 6 Trappist breweries in Belgium, and I'm pretty sure all of them made a triple at one time or another. And you're right. If that style is made well, it's really an event. I mean, it's a culinary event for yourself, and it's kind of a meal in a glass type style. And yeah, if it's done right. And that was another thing too, is I wanted to discuss how American craft brewers have not only resurrected some of these styles and made them more relevant, but how they've changed them, how they've created new parameters and new ways of understanding the taste. I'm having, for instance, right now, a non-alcoholic pilsner from Notch, and a Czech style, and it's fantastic, and it's the sort of style and approach you wouldn't have seen in the United States that frequently, as recently as I'd say 12, 13 years ago, because most Pilsner in the US is, of course, of the macro variety. It's the basis, it's the style that's the basis of Budweiser, Miller Lite,
It's like
Heineken.
a corn beer.
Yeah. Whereas this Notch is sort of more refined and beers, lagers like this expand our understanding of what lagers can be in the US. So,
Well, I traveled into Boston today. Not such a hard day, but you're on a train and you're hanging out. Usually, I find the first thing I need to settle my stomach is a good pills. So we're going to go to another style that's in your book, the Pilsner. And here, of course, they're known for their Czech style beers. This is a great, really crisp Czech style pills. Why don't you talk to me about the Pilsner style, just to get a sense of, because if you really, this is like the primer book.
yes.
This is like every core style of real beer that's not just for beer geeks, but if you want to learn about different ways of tasting, like with the triple. Triple's great for me. That's a Friday night beer. You can start with that. It's a little stronger, but the flavor is well rounded, and it fills your mouth in a way that people maybe these days think a cocktail should.
Sure. Well, you're absolutely right, Jimmy. Okay, so Pilsner, I love the style. The history of Pilsner is a fascinating one. Basically, the burghers of Pilsen, what was then part of the Austrian Empire, in the 1840s, they owned the rights to brew beer within the town limits, and they were quite upset over the competition from beers coming in from the German states, what became Germany. So they wanted a way to compete, basically. This was capitalism at its best. And they hired a German brewmaster named Joseph Groll to come up with a beer for Pilsen. Okay. Just, in the style of Germany. So German beers at that point were getting a little bit lighter colored. They were still on the darker side. They were still on the maltier side. They were bubbly, but not that bubbly. But of course, this is, German beer, so it's fantastic. And the Czechs wanted something to compete with it. And so Groll in 1842, in the fall, I believe it was October 5th, the morning of, brews what becomes the first Pilsner in the world. And it's a sensation almost from the word go. I don't want to overstate it. This is the early 19th century, so it's not like they had a lot of refrigeration or any artificial refrigeration or could ship very far quickly. But no one to that point had seen a sort of golden, effervescent beer like that. And so the Czechs produce Pilsen produces this. It soon spreads throughout the empire, then throughout parts of most of Europe. And then what happens? It's a very fortuitous for the style and for our palate today. So it's born in 1842. Europe, by the end of that decade, is thrown into all sorts of revolution and counter-revolution. So it becomes a very violent place. And a lot of Czechs and a lot of Germans emigrate to the United States
What
to
were they
escape
arguing
it.
about?
Systems of government, who was right, religion, of course, and systems of government.
I talked with Brian Alberts. He's a beer historian,
Uh-huh.
and he was talking about beer riots.
Oh, there were beer riots. There were beer riots.
Paid him, I guess,
Sure,
in
sure.
Munich, they got paid in beer.
There were one of the great scenes in the birth of Pilsner is that the residents of Pilsen and the residents of Bohemia dumped out the kegs in the public square that they didn't like. This was before Grohl's innovation, and so there were routine public displays of disapproval, let's say. But even in the United States, there were riots over beer and labor disputes with management over brewery operations, all sorts of things. But for our story of Pilsner, the immigration to the U.S. Brings the style, and it's from that immigration that the great brew houses of the Midwest, Milwaukee and St. Louis, grow up, right? And what do they produce? They produce styles based off Pilsner.
And I know you love that story because what was your
My last book was Pilsner, How the Beer of Kings Changed the World.
And we had Chris Lauren call in on that briefly as well. So I know you came in primed. He's got a whole, but I'm going to screw him up because there's a whole page of notes. And
Right.
I'm here at Notch. I want to try things like the Alt beer, the Dunkelrauch beer. I'm going to go to the Kolsch next. But I love it. He started with a triple. The second entry is porter. So why did you start with those two beers? If you're so focused on Pilsners.
The book is seasonal. So I want to give people, 52 options and then some to drink throughout the year, right? Through every week of the year, basically. Try a new style, learn the history, learn the learn what to consider when you sample it and when you go shopping for it. So I start in winter. And that's where you get the
He's
sort of
reading from the book right now.
Yes.
You can't even remember it. When did you wrote this? When did you finish it?
The idea. Oh, when did I finish it? About 6 or 7 months ago.
Yeah, so the
it's
writers,
been revision.
by the time the book comes out, they're already working on the next story.
I do have. I want to find this quote actually because I love this from Michael Jackson about beer in winter, and this took a while to track down. In fact, he says,
and I'll say while you're doing that, I would say I love that you reference Michael Jackson, the great writer, because even Garrett Oliver a few years ago, when he created his his foundation to help people, get into the beer industry. It was called the Michael J. Jackson Foundation. And even with that out there, I think people still get confused about who
we're talking about.
Was. Yeah.
So Jackson wrote, this would have been, I think this was in probably a column for The Independent in the UK, but winter beers are as much a state of mind as a style. And so what he meant by that was that there's they're the richer, thicker, you called a triple of a Friday night beer, the sort of companion beers. They're stronger, generally stronger in alcohol, richer in taste, meatier, I would say, in mouthfeel. And so that's why I put a style like porter in the winter section, because porter is dark, it's warming, it shouldn't be served ice cold. It's very rich in taste and in mouthfeel. And it has a history in the United States. I mean, before the rise of Pilsner, and before the rise of lager in general in the U.S., porter was probably the best-selling style in the United States, and it was certainly that in the 18th century. In fact, one of the things I put in the book and what I've always been interested in is that we can still find that we can still find George Washington himself ordering hogsheads of porter from the UK to have them shipped to Virginia. So it's one of those styles that's been around for a long time and that's been new.
I'm going to give quotes from your own book, but it says that porter it was the first breakout beer style. It basically traveled wherever British imperialism did.
Exactly.
And I want to say, for me, having a brown beer, and they said that porter started as a brown beer. A lot of styles changed. Like you mentioned that porter changed as say the price or the taxing on malt, the grain, which is the core of the
Right,
beer, went
right.
up. They learned to do tricks like roast it more to give it a different kind of flavor. And I'm
Exactly.
going to list to my listeners. That's why, if you ever notice why Starbucks coffee, it always had that old roasty, that strong roasty flavor, is because they're buying. I can say this is really bad, but they're buying a cheaper
Sure.
bean, and you roast it to a more bitter or just a roasted flavor. Then you can add milk and sugar and things and cut it. And so you actually feel like you're getting flavor.
Right.
But the same trick can happen
Same
in
pour.
brewing.
Yep. Yes.
You,
And it
you
did.
can or caramelizing an ingredient when you're cooking. So it's not a bad trick, but
Right.
it's a trick to make a little more money out of. Caramelizing onions gives it a lot more flavor.
Yeah. Porter had the good luck of growing up in the UK, which was, of course, the world power at the time. So it got shipped far and wide and became sort of the reference point for beer. And it makes it the rise of Pilsner and these lighter styles, lighter colored styles, lighter tasting styles, all the more remarkable, because the humanity's palate as far as beer went changed pretty drastically. The styles changed and what was popular changed. So
But the old styles are great.
it's fantastic.
You think about, if you like, even a place like Notch. I mean, there's a range of, there's even an alcoholic pills like you're having. There's a mix of German or Czech inspired beers, but they also go with this. There's a really nice dark, almost a black lager that's on tap as well. That's going to be my final beer when I leave.
One of my favorite, two of my favorite styles that I wrote about was, Rogan beer, which, is rye, basically rye based. And that's a style from way back. And I really enjoy like writing about, a Dunkel, which was kind of the everyday beer of what became Germany in the early 1800s. I was the kind of sort of darker, just sort of table beer of Germans back then, and was was the beer that was one of the styles that the burgers of Pilsen, the brewers in Bohemia, were competing against. So, you're right. I mean, there's some of these older styles; they're
We can
fantastic.
toast while you're talking.
What?
Here, grab your glass and toast and keep talking.
Cheers. One of the things one of the great things about beer is the history of it and how new generations put their spin on it. So yes, these older styles are fantastic, and one of the reasons they're fantastic is because American craft brewers took them and made them their own. So
Well, that's true, and it's pretty neat. So, how important are styles like now? When you're thinking
that is
about,
a fantastic question.
you had the New England IPA, and people have, a regular. Everyone wants a regular beer. They want a lager. They want a pilsner. But the range of styles, and we already started with triple,
Right.
porter. There's a whole world of beer that, in some ways, goes beyond wine,
Right.
just because there's so many traditional styles.
Yes. Well, I'm glad you brought up
It's
wine.
not just fermented fruit.
Yes. There, in the
There's
U.S.
more of a recipe, like maybe that's the term. With beer, there's more of a recipe, even though not denigrating fruit fermenters. But there's definitely a recipe involved. While with fruit, it's usually getting the best fruit
Yes.
and letting it be.
And as far as the government's concerned, a wine and a wine style is defined almost entirely by that fruit, whereas they don't have, in the U.S. at least, the same parameters for beer. Beer is, to the government, it's fermented grain with X amount of alcohol in it, and that's that, right? And so that gives that provides a canvas on which brewers can paint. And so I think that's one of the reasons the United States has been so innovative in its brewing and its beer styles, because there's so much runway for coming up with new things that, winemakers, spirits, distillers don't have the same opportunity. You want to call yourself a bourbon, you better hit certain check marks or you're not going to get that license. Okay. Brewing, they don't have that. They don't. So they can play with different styles. They can take them in and make them their own. And another older style I want to mention, which I really enjoy and really love, and I wish there was more of it made out, if you're listening and you have the means to make it, is braggot. So that's the mead and ale. It's fantastic. It's like
Why do you like that
honey taste.
style?
because it has sort of a smooth, honeyish taste. And you want to talk about winter warming beers? It's definitely among that class, and it's also got fantastic roots in the Middle Ages, and now I'm trying to find it in the book.
When I think
Yes.
about home brewing, I remember even in college, I had friends that you could make a simple. You get the old Grolsch or some kind of, an easy top up
Mhm.
bottle. You can make with honey and sugar and water, or honey
Yes,
and
and
water and fruit or something. You can make an easy mead, and it's probably the easiest thing to brew at home.
yes,
So it makes a
definitely.
lot of sense.
Mhm.
And how do you make it if you're doing mead and beer? Is that a mix?
It's proportional. It's supposed to be half and half. The honey would be I believe added first, and um, then blended. It's like a lot of lambics or gurza or sort of a blended beer. And it's that in itself is an art form for the style. But I think fermented honey is probably the oldest fermented beverage in the world. So at some point somebody decided to top it off with ale, and that's where we got
So
braggot.
where have you had braggot?
Oh, I can't. I mean, I've never had it on tap. I know that, but the last time might have been a year or two ago for the book for one of the tastings.
It'd be fun to do is we're doing it right now, and the one thing I thought, because I made a point of buying the book. I know you had some public events in Boston. You were at the Harvard Bookstore with Andy Crouch,
Mhm.
and then last week you were in New York City for a Beer Week event. What was that event in New York?
It was at the Brooklyn Brewery, a talk and a signing, and I went into sort of the history of history of styles and how we got to styles. And I went back to Michael Jackson because he basically whole cloth invented the way we talk about beer styles. Prior to his writing in the mid 1970s, late 1970s, most beer was written about in terms of type or broad categories. Lighter colored beer, darker colored beer, sweeter beer, sour beer. They or even referred to it by esoteric terms like species. He's the one who said, I'm going to define quote unquote style, and I'm going to say that it's defined by what the brewers use, what how long it takes them to use what they use, and what they were intending. And that's what he did. And he also defined it, and this is one of the things I loved about his early books was, it was beer was he defined it by place. Beer, a lot of the styles that I write about in the golden age of beer and that are out there were born in a certain place. We were just talking about Pilsner, born in Pilsen, alt beer in Dusseldorf, Kolsch around Cologne. On and on. There's the style Kentucky Common, which has been resurrected, not nearly enough in recent years in the United States. California Common out on the West Coast, usually often called steam beer. So I really enjoy the history.
It's easy to geek out on different
Yes,
styles
it
when you
is.
know them, but really the inspiration should be like a good maker.
Yes.
Like right now, if we talk about New York area, there's Suarez Family Brewing
Mhm.
up in the Hudson Valley. I don't know if you've had them,
No.
but they were now they're going on 10 years
Mhm.
of making really quality. They have a beer they call country beer, which might be
Oh, that's
spontaneous
awesome.
fermented as well as pilsner. And
Mhm.
and I'm not speaking for them, but I will just say that I feel that the maker can define the style.
Right.
And
Right.
I wonder if you in history and the research you did to pin it, like you mentioned Grohl for
Uh-huh.
pilsner. Are there others that you can pin a style to?
That's a very good question. I mean, the answer is yes. Alt beer was developed by a handful of breweries in Dusseldorf. That's one. Steam beer for a long time was the domain of Anchor Brewing in San Francisco, which is on a path toward resurrection. But they literally, they had the trademark on it and literally defined it for a long time. And I'm trying to also think there's a different breweries became associated with different styles. The best-selling Vienna lager in the world, for instance, is from the Boston Beer Company. It's not from any brewery in Austria.
Is it?
So yeah, so
So what's
that's
Vienna lagers in
yes.
your book?
Mhm.
What's a Vienna lager?
Vienna lager is kind of the sort of the
Jay, keep going.
Austrian.
We're talking to the guy that works here because he's amazing. I'm gonna listen. The audience can listen in. Jay, do you think I could have you'll come and tell us what it is, but we're gonna try the alt beer. So
Mhm.
we're talking about styles, and I got Tom to mention. So the stick of alt beer. What are the choices?
Stick alt.
What are the choices for how that can be served?
I could put that in a Stange, or I can do a half liter or a Schnitt, which is a half pour.
Stanga.
You got
Oh
it.
wow.
That's Jay at Notch Brewing. Thank you, Tom.
No, but Vienna Lager was born in 1851 at the Klein Schwetzschat brewery by a very big figure in brewing called named Anton Dreyer. He developed a lot of techniques for creating beers that were not as dark, and sort of he if there's a godfather of Pilsner, it's Anton.
So you're saying that 250 years ago, because now it's almost 200 years ago, more beers were dark
Yes. Oh yeah.
or
Oh, yes.
cloudy or
Mhm. Well, not necessarily cloudy. Oh, that's another interesting thing that I found out about. And this is I give credit to other researchers and fantastic beer writing community, but I had no idea that there was a sort of mild haze craze in the US about 40 years ago, around 1980, 82. There were hazy beers out there. The Great Sierra Nevada out in Northern California produced some of its earliest beers were hazy, right? Not necessarily by intention, but we tend to
Sounds
think
like-
of
so Jay, the pour on this, because we're at Notch and it's Czech and German inspired. This is a very interesting pour. Just tell us what it is.
That is the traditional way that alt beer is served
That's
in
wild.
the Dusseldorf area. This is actually 0.25 liters. I don't know what the traditional might be 0.2 or 0.3.
So Tom, look at it. It's got like almost all of it's the head. The famous is this a side
oh,
pour?
that's a label.
No, that's actually the label.
Oh, the label.
Yeah.
I was impressed. There's a white. It's a white label glass. Look at you,
That's gorgeous.
Jay.
So you could float.
Anyways,
you could float a
it's-
50-cent piece on that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a nice pour.
Yeah.
So yeah. So the glass. Okay, I get it. This is an alt beer glass.
Yes. Specifically for the alt beer. Yeah.
Thank you,
This is
Jay.
the Kolsch glass, which is 0.2 liters on the Kolsch Stange.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Jay, we're talking about styles. Glassware is important. I remember when I first started in craft beer, every brewery used to give you a different glass.
Yep.
Why is that so important? Or what have you been taught at Notch about the glassware?
This the Stange is the traditional way that these beers are served. Usually in the area, there would be servers walking around with a tray of 10 of them called a kranz. And you just, if they see you empty, they'll give you a new one. And what they'll do is they'll mark your coaster each
With a
time you
notch.
get one.
Yeah.
When you're done, you put a coaster on top of your glass, and that tells the server no more. And then they count up the notches, and that is how much you pay at the end of the night.
And they take your money and you have to leave for the next person.
Yeah, probably, yeah. There might be a line out the door. We actually do a traditional Kolsch service. We had one just recently last week, and that's something we do here quite often. And that's actually where the name of the brewery got its name, is the Notch, from the Cologne brew houses.
That's amazing. Actually, a place that's familiar to me, McSorley's in the East Village in New York, they have a similar thing. They keep bringing out, they'll bring out, you ask them for, if there's 5 of you, they bring you 2 glasses of whatever it is. It's dark or light.
Dark or light,
and
right?
they keep
Is it
bringing
still
it.
around?
And it's still there, and they
Oh,
don't
wow.
stop until you say you're done. And the same way, they're keeping a notch of each one. So the point is, when the minute you're done ordering that next round of beers, you're out.
You tell them.
That's how it is. Talk about beer
Thank
service.
you.
Tom, that was a great little
Okay.
interlude.
That was fantastic.
But I did, yeah. So this alt beer glass, talking about glassware and styles, it's white. And at first I thought, oh, this is like the famous.
Yeah, I thought
We're
the
not going to
same
get
thing,
into the
but no, it's a
pours
yes.
because that's another show. But it looks like the whole thing's white. And I realized I want to switch to like a little dark. I mean, I'm drinking a Kolsch. We'll talk about Kolsch. But alt beer to me in Dusseldorf, we talk about makers or regions. Let's go to regions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I know you know a lot about Pilsner, but alt beer is always one of the coolest styles.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so specific to that town.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like Berliner Weiss, if you really know
Yes.
that, you know, and it's like Leipziger in Leipzig,
Mm-hmm.
which is in the eastern part of Germany. It's based on the water and all these things. But alt beer, this is a nice, it's like ambery. I almost feel like in that early days of craft beer, if you had a copper ale, it's really an alt beer. But the
Right,
alt beer
yes.
is good.
Right. No, I agree. Well, obviously, alt means old in German, but there are a lot of amber ales in the United States or that have been, that have been released in the U.S. in the last 30, 40 years. And I think most of those are alt beers. They're sort of malty, almost like a dark fruit taste.
But the flavor profile is not right in a lot of those. You know,
right.
when you get the like this is, it's supposed to be dry, but there's a mineral finish on the notch alt beer
Right.
that you don't get in a lot of just American ambers.
Right. I think the style originally was meant to compete with the the English pale ales, coming out of the UK, and that were catching on. The techniques behind them and the technology behind them was taking the brewing industry by storm in Europe. And I think the resurrection of the alt beer style in the mid 1800s was a reaction to that. But it should be, you're right, it should have a minerally like sort of aftertaste. But I'm always struck by like the sort of malty, like it's not heavy. It's not like a triple or a barley wine or some Scotch ale or something like that. But it does have a heaviness to it, and an almost sweet like like plummy taste.
Well, we're getting into Lent,
Right.
And we used to always joke, and at a bunch of bars we did it years ago. We called liquid Lent, and the idea was, could you live on beer alone?
Yes.
If you're fasting during Lent, and I know you said you're fasting, so you're not drinking alcohol, but would alt beer suffice as a bready beer?
Yes.
Do we have to
that's
go
a fantastic adjective. Yes, bready.
Do we have to go to Doppelbock?
No, Doppelbock. Well, the Bach styles might very well have been born of monastic fasting during Lent. But yes, bready is a fantastic adjective for some of these darker Northern European, Central European styles. Also, the rich barley wine of England and Scotch ale right over the border. These are extremely, by beer standards, extremely strong beers, but also, rich and full, just sort of full of life, I would say vigor. You're drinking you're drinking a meal.
Ready.
Yeah.
But Tom, I'm probably talking more than I usually do because I love doing one-on-ones now. So in my little world, what is food? These days, I'm appreciating the simplicity of a really good onion, a beet, a really good farm raised egg.
Okay.
And what am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is that when I taste a beer, it means something different to me. Like I think about I'm in a simple wine bar. I'm not getting an Ozempic food modified version of a McDonald's hamburger to stimulate my palate to want a sweet, sugary drink.
Right.
I'm getting this simple dryness, even though it's bready, the alt beer is still dry. And I want something like, I just want a piece of cheese right now.
Right.
I might want some bread. I might want a little salami.
Simplicity in it.
And how is that universal? Like if I'm in Paris in a wine bar, if I just had a rounded cheese and a little bit of salami and baguette, I can have an entire meal as long as I have the wine. So for me, it's like I'm trying to say is these simple styles, they become a meal with just a few other things.
Right.
Raw vegetable, a pickle, and some cheese.
And the meal, you're saying the meal helps you appreciate the style or vice versa?
It's like a good traditional style of beer. Many of them they have a dryness, a minerality like this alt beer. That many of you, if you haven't tried it, you got to. I think the only one I can tell you that's commercially available in indie setting is probably the Uruga alt beer, which
Okay.
Be United imports.
Okay.
But otherwise, I'm here at Notch Brewing, and I'm drinking a great alt beer.
Right.
There's not too many people making an alt beer.
Right.
But
Exactly.
the thing is, right now, I want like if I was in New York, I'd go to Runner and Stone and ask for a custom pretzel. I want a really good piece of bread, but I don't even need it because the bread's in the glass.
Right. Well, it's one of the.
But I just want a simple food. I want just simple farm cheese right now.
But you want the style made well and made.
Yeah. But that makes you want. The pairing is that simple because in my mouth I have this isn't that foreign, but when you think about old school real food pairings, and I want this simple beer that's just right. There's a dryness which favors food. There's the minerality because that's what the alt beer should be. Then I just need literally right now I need a piece of cheese.
Right.
And it could almost be any cheese, but a little aged cheese might be good.
Right.
Or a farm, like a little farm camembert thing.
In my own experience, I mean, in my younger days, I used to, seek out the busiest style, the busiest tasting beers, whatever style. And when I was sort of developing a taste for craft beer, the style du jour, and it still is an India Pale Ale. And 20 years ago, there was kind of I've called it a sort of race to the end of history of just trying to make it as hoppy and as complicated and as bitter as humanly possible, and then bragging about that on the label. And
who's the philosopher that like 400 or 500 years ago talking about the end of the world?
Nostradamus?
Yeah, Nostradamus.
Right.
I literally heard someone, I was over by Harvard today at the bookstore.
Right.
And I heard someone talking about Nostradamus referencing
Really
someone. And I was like, you guys you have a little too much historical knowledge. And you don't really make sense.
Well, end of history was Francis Fukuyama, and he's still very much with us, I believe. But he had the theory at the end of the 20th century that the democracy and capitalism had won the day, and that was the end of history, end of human achievement. Of course, we know he might have been premature, but
and he also is he still alive?
Yes, I think so.
Oh, he is.
Yes.
Well, I would sadly to say, guys, we'll make a drink. We probably drink more as a society to the death of someone. At one point, we will drink to his death. That's not morbid.
No. Yeah.
Reality.
But that's one of the things I chased, and I know a lot of people in my cohort chased that. We wanted the more complicated beers. We wanted the sort of trendy, busy beers, and now I think that turned off some of the market. I think that's one of the reasons the younger people, millennials, Gen Z, aren't as keen on beer and brewing now because its stuff got so bitter, it got so strong, it got so complicated. But it also makes me appreciate, and I know this view is shared inside and outside the industry, just to appreciate a more, I don't want to say simple in the sense of simple to make because they're not, but more simply done and cleaner approaches to style and to beer making. You can really sit down and appreciate what it takes to make a great pilsner, or what it takes to make a great alt beer, or some of the IPAs that are
triple.
Oh my God. But some of the IPAs that are coming out now, they're a lot cleaner. And I mean that in like the idea of sort of a dryness and a smoothness to them that wasn't around 20 years ago. People used to seek out, and the market demanded busy. I can remember when Notch debuted around 2010, I believe, 2011. They were at the vanguard of what was then called the session beer craze, and I write about that in the Golden Age of Beer. The session craze was the idea of sort of lower alcohol, less complicated beers, and it hit it just the right time.
Which is what beer really was for
a long time.
And still is.
Then I think some aspects of it got kind of gimmicky and turned people off. And I'm glad to say that number one, there's a lot more variety out there. It's I don't want to downplay the issues the industry faces and the challenges, but for a consumer, there's a lot of opportunity out there, and I hope my book helps them make sense of it. But also that it's just there's more of an adherence to style and to making them just as they're supposed to be, as with historical precedent, than
Well,
I think ever
at
before.
least for inspiration.
Yeah.
I mean, let's look at the beers I had today at Notch, and you're only an observer because your version of Lent is not my liquid Lent. Sadly, Tom,
I
you're
know.
abstaining in Lent, and I understand that.
Yeah, well,
But you're drinking the non-alcoholic
oh, it's
pills.
fantastic.
But the alt beer for me, when I was here last, it was 2 or 3 years ago. We did the Pitchline Pills episode with Chris Loring. That was an important moment in my as a beer consumer.
Why is that? Why?
Because it was a unique thing where he had figured out that in the old days they had pitch that lined wooden tanks, and that was either how they held or fermented the beer. Can't quite remember the whole story,
Okay.
but I will say when you're at Notch in Brighton, Boston, when you're getting that right off the tap, there's only a limited number of those kegs. I will say that in that time and that day, that was the best beer I'd ever had in my life.
I had a similar experience in Pilsen, actually, the birthplace of Pilsner. They have the brewery is still the birthplace is there, not the original brew house, but it's still in the same location. And they do serve from the tap from wooden casks. I guess it's unpasteurized. It's an incredible version of Pilsner Urquell, liquid bread. And there's a couple of places in town that also serve it on tap, and I can't, because I had some that morning when I left, and then later in the afternoon when I was flying out of the Prague airport, I had some on. It's just not the same. So yeah, if you and that's one of the other great.
Tom, let's do this. I've had seminal moments. Sometimes we have a great conversation, and unfortunately, my pen's on the floor, so I can't write all my notes down. But I think that the moment we're having is that, and for society, that good beer, like to me, good cider and the craze of natural wine, is that it's not alcohol as much as it's fermented food or fermented drinks that have alcohol in them.
Yes.
And that's something with our society that we haven't quite crossed over yet. But I think that enough people like good natural wine and good cider and beer or mead that you could make an argument that these fermented foods are a lot different from a mainstream distilled hard alcohol. Kill you.
Yes.
If you're not careful, manage it properly.
Right. I think there is a sort of return, and this is what I was kind of getting at earlier, was a sort of return to simplicity and appreciation of the skill set required to make some of these styles as they were intended, and to make them to the point where you can taste different aspects in the style, and they don't all sort of taste the same, or they don't all, grab you by the lapels and slap you in the face with the bitterness. So that's been a great trend. Really
Tom, back to another style. So one thing they do really well here at Notch Brewing in Brighton, Boston, as well as Salem, is they make a great Kolsch.
Yes.
Do you have a chapter on Kolsch in there?
I do have.
Look at that. Even though we have the book in front of him, he brought his own notes. So, Tom, your background.
Okay.
I know you as a beer writer, but I know you also write. You actually have a day job. I know a really great friend who's a barbecue writer whose real job is he writes for National Chamber of Commerce website.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, I've been a business journalist for about just over 20 years. I'm a deputy editor of Commercial Observer in New York. I've written a variety of publications.
So what's that? You're writing about business trends?
Mostly real estate and Wall Street. So, a lot of finance, a lot of how we work now, why we live where we live.
And a few years back, you were also the Crane's Business Daily.
I was there. I was a Crane's.
I'm on all these weird newsletters.
Yeah,
so.
And I've written for the Times, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. Anyways, there's a lot of places.
So
in
your skills as a journalist, are you collating information, or are people sending it to you?
Right.
How do you get your information as a journalist?
Well, that's a very good question. As for the golden age of beer, I had a great repertoire to pull from my last two beer books, especially The Audacity of Hops, which was a history of craft beer in the United States, because that book was a sort of a history of business and a social history of the industry. So I ended up talking to, over a couple of years, many of the major figures in craft brewing in the United States. I think like basically I got to everybody. Unfortunately, I did not get to Michael Jackson because I started my research too late. He died in 2007. But I was able to talk to the leading brewers, the leading brewery founders, some of the great hop cultivators, some of the academics.
And I'll say, Tom, when Audacity of Hop came out in what year?
The first edition was 2013.
Yeah, when that came out, it gave a lot of us a sense of what had made the modern era. I'm not even call it craft beer anymore. We're going to call it the modern era of beer.
Mm-hmm.
Did you cover the? Let's talk about some of these guys. Was there Burt Grant?
Oh yeah,
Give him a shout out because you have a neat quote in the book about Michael Jackson driving in a Rolls Royce.
Yeah, they were driving.
I don't know any of any of them, but all I know is that Burt Grant must have been great. But why? Where was he? Was he in
Burt Grant
Pacific Northwest?
Burt Grant started what became the first post-prohibition brew pub in the United States in Washington State in an old opera house. And Grant himself was kind of operatic. He was of Scottish descent, grew up in Canada. He was born in Scotland, I think, moved to Canada when he was 2. And he wore a kilt and carried a claymore and was very doctrinaire about how beer should be served at what temperature.
But he quoted. He said because he was Scottish, and then Michael Jackson said,
right. They were tasting what was a Scotch.
When were you last in Scotland? He says, well, I came here when I was 2 years old.
And they were tasting a Scotch ale, and Jackson was like, this is a bit hoppy for a Scotch ale. It should be maltier. And that's when, Grant says, don't tell me about Scotch ale. I'm Scottish. So, but he was one of those pioneers too of hoppier beers that would sort of roar out of the Pacific Northwest and Northern California, beginning in the early 1980s.
So your books now, I mean, you're 3. I don't know how many books you've written, but 3 beer books in. Your book is very entertaining.
Thank you.
It's not just like one of those magazine style. Here's a beer, here's a style, here's a beer. This is actually if you like to read, which I do.
Yes. I'm
going to read this whole damn book.
Yes, thank
cover
you.
to cover.
It. I
don't usually say that.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Jimmy. I appreciate it. I've actually written about wine as well and spirits, but I love writing about beer and I love returning to it because it is not only a changing industry, but it's sort of just like we talked about earlier. I mean, there's all sorts of things that brewers can and do with these styles. So you revisit it. You can revisit it month to month or even year to year and find new things that are interesting and new trends. And I'm grateful for that because, like I said, I wrote this book over 3 years and compiled it, and there was so much to work with. There's so much material.
Yeah. Well, going back to beer styles, in my little career of beer and restaurants, the hardest thing is, let's say you're doing a beer pairing, you're doing a beer tasting of progression of styles.
Mm-hmm.
And the hardest thing is making sure that each beer is good.
Yeah.
So you can't just go out and say, let's pick 20 different beers.
Right.
And taste them all. The same as wine or anything else. You're like, well, I might only be able to find 2 or 3 really good ones. But honestly, if you're doing a tasting or something, sometimes 2 or 3 is enough. Like tonight we started with Notch's amazing Czech Pilsner.
Mm-hmm.
That restored me. I've been traveling. My stomach was upset. That happens. Think about you being on a train or you're commuting and
right.
The first thing you want is to grab a Pilsner. This one was spot on. But now, going to this alt beer, why is that so great? Like, I literally feel like I just didn't have a meal, but my palate feels like I did something right by my day.
Right.
Like but I don't want to go back from the alt beer. But I also don't want to just go darker now. Right. I'm going to order another alt beer.
Okay.
And I knocked over the other glass.
That's right. It's almost empty.
Yeah.
But that gets back, I think, to the simplicity and the effort and the skill set that goes into making some of these styles and making them relevant. As if it's well done, man. It is a good experience, right? And one that people can appreciate. And I hope my book, The Golden Age of Beer, helps people to appreciate it more.
So,
Really
Tom, you
is.
said you live near here, and what do you want to say about Notch Brewing in Brighton? Do you think you would come here and hang out?
For those listening, it's literally about 1.7 miles down the street from me. I am blown away. It's in an urban setting, an urban neighborhood in Boston, which as
Boston's urban.
yeah, your listeners might know it's a very dense area. So I'm very impressed with the use of the space and the location. This isn't pastoral or some rural mountainside or something. This is we're in the city where it's vibrant.
So but you said you took the bus here.
Mm-hmm.
So you take a bus, you
Yes.
use public transportation.
Yes.
I was on a commuter train to get here, and it's funny. I was with there was someone on the train that didn't really know how to take trains.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I know you live in a city, and our listeners probably all live in a city.
Right.
I could not live without trains
Yes.
and subways and buses. So,
Right.
But
Right.
well, Tom, it's great talking to you.
Hey, Jimmy, thank you so much.
Last thing to say about your book, how about this? A few weeks ago, you were in Boston talking with a great writer, Andy Crouch. Couple highlights of that book event, because you do get. I mean, I know you have a day job, but when you do have some book events. And,
Yeah. Well, my day job and my beer writing actually intersect quite a bit because I write about place a lot, and I write about real estate, and I write about business trends. So one of the best questions we got at that event was about the future of the industry and what consumers can do to help it. And we talked about seeking out places like Notch and patronizing them, and talking to the bartenders and the experts about what you should be drinking and what goes with what and what goes well. So, COVID was brutal to the industry. And one of the ways to bring it back is to seek out the physical locations of these places. And it's all the better if it's off a bus line or a train line. So you just turn around and go home. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to get serious for a minute. For me personally, I agree with Tom, and I love this book because for me, my entire career has been about when I taste something I really like, it inspires me. And these days, whether it's a good mezcal, a good natural wine, a good hard cider, or a good beer, I will go for those. Unfortunately, too often, there's not anything that fits that. And I'm not as articulate as Tom is. But how do you help me? What I'm trying to say is, so we're here today. I needed that really perfect pills to restore me from a day of traveling.
How do you find it?
And it was just spot on. But then moving on to the Notch Alt beer, I'm feeling inspired now. And in fact, I want another one. What it does, I think this is what I was thinking about last night. So 20 years ago as a chef, I worked at a program. We would go into classrooms and talk to third and fourth graders.
That's awesome.
About food and pairing. And the simplicity of what we talked about were things like, okay, there's salty, there's sour, there's sweet. So we literally have them taste a lemon, have them taste a grape for fruity. So and then a fifth element was umami was added. But there's not that many elements of flavor. And why am I saying this, Tom?
Right.
Because when I drink a beer, it's the same thing.
Right.
There's a bitterness, but there's also this minerality.
Right.
And it completes your palate. And then all you need is a piece of cheese and you're set.
Right. I totally agree. And I try to do in my book, flavor profiles, but also give suggestions. You like this style? Here's some brands that are out there you can try, or some places you should seek out. So I totally agree. And that can be one of the frustrating things with wine, I think, is you read about a style or varietal that you want to try, and it becomes very hard to find affordable examples. But the great thing about beer is the best beer in the world. I was just thinking about this the other day. Was the best beer in the world tops out in price at $15, $20. So some go higher, but
I'm in Notch Brewing in Brighton.
Yeah.
To me, right now, the best beer in the world was A, the Czech style pills, and B, the Sticka Alt beer, which I'm going to have another one of.
All right.
And we are on the same page on this because I know with wine as well. I can go to one. I have one specialty wine store I'll go to. It's very affordable. I can get a natural wine, and to find that right wine out of thousands of wines, it's the same with you as a consumer. And I feel bad for everybody. This is why I'm in the industry, and I love it. I was always in a situation like this where I have someone curating what I'm tasting. You know, I'm at a really great brewery that we know.
Right.
I have a really great distributor, importer who's bringing me a wine or the mezcal. But to go out into the world, you go to an average restaurant, bar, or retail store, you could not pick off the shelf.
Right.
We're going to a whole other subject, but you cannot pick off the shelf what's going to be good and what's going to be just okay, or
Right.
just not even good at all.
Right.
And
Right.
that's really the issue of the industry.
I think so too.
There's
I
so
mean,
many choices.
Yeah. That you need a book like mine to make sense of it. No, the expertise,
really do.
the expertise can be far and few between. I totally agree. And people don't want to spend they don't want to have too many bad experiences. It's going to turn them off.
Yeah.
And I really do think that's what's happened with younger consumers is they hit craft beer, so to speak, right when it was peaking in its bitterness and its sort of craziness, and it's hard to bring them back. So, but we'll see what
I
happens.
only say there's nothing wrong with beer.
There's something.
Same
Yeah.
way there's nothing wrong with hard cider or wine. Just that you have to find the good producers
Yes.
and the good outlets and the good restaurants and the good bars that actually do the homework for you.
Yes.
The same as having a good rep. If you're, I mean, on my retail side, wholesale side, I would always find that really good sales rep, and they do the homework for you.
Yes.
So don't expect that you can go into a warehouse style liquor store and be able to pick a good anything.
Right. But the hunt is part of the fun.
Thank
So
you.
I see it. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. We talked a lot, but this has been great.
Thank
I'm gonna get another one of the. What is it? We're at Notch Brewing. Where are we?
Yes.
Tell us
We're
where
at
we
Notch
are.
Brewing
Tom, say it.
in the Brighton neighborhood of Boston.
Thanks, man. All right. Thanks so much for joining me, Tom.
Thank you so much.
Thanks
Thank
to
you.
George and Gabe for cleaning this up back at Heritage Radio Network. We'll catch you next time on Beer Sessions Radio. All right. Thank you.